political career risk for politicians, right? If they advocate for Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes down, then they look bad. Even though we know Bitcoin will go back up, they're still concerned about these things. But it's got to get to the point where it's career risk not to get into Bitcoin. And I think a lot of them also are waiting for someone else to make a move, specifically the US. That's why I'm very bullish or grateful for movements in the US, because that makes our job a lot easier, because we will just say, like, look at the US, right? Like Korea will look at the US, Japan will look at the US, Taiwan will look at the US. And you saw that with the ETFs. And I think when the US does something seriously with accumulating for their Bitcoin reserve, everyone else will follow.
As Bitcoin whales unload billions, the question isn't whether nation-states will adopt Bitcoin, but which one will move first. Bitcoin markets remain volatile, with whales offloading nearly 147,000 BTC, $16.5 billion, over the past 30 days, the fastest outflow of the cycle. Yet, Samson Mow, CEO of January 3rd and a leading advocate for Bitcoin nation-state adoption, argues that governments, particularly in less developed countries, cannot afford to ignore the long-term opportunity. He notes that mining Bitcoin could directly fund essential infrastructure such as hospitals, roads, and railways, turning digital assets into engines of development. The hesitation, however, lies in political and career risk. Just as investors like Ryan Cohen face reputational damage if bold bets fail, politicians fear being discredited if Bitcoin's price dips after they endorse it. Mow emphasizes that many Asian governments, including Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, look to the US for direction. The success of Bitcoin ETFs has already provided momentum, and if the US begins accumulating reserves, others will likely follow. Still, challenges persist. Promising talks with Suriname's leadership collapsed after World Bank pressure, while Japan's central bank maintains a cautious stance. Despite this, signs of progress are emerging. Korea's bipartisan support for pro-Bitcoin legislation and the growing global acceptance of ETFs point to gradual change. Mow stresses patience, regulatory tone, political endorsements, and time will ultimately tip the balance toward broader adoption. We're still early in the game. Bitcoin's biggest breakout is still on the horizon. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next major move.
Well, they absolutely need those things because it opens the door to more investments.
Yeah.
Like when I meet with a lot of governments in less developed countries, one of the things I say is you can mine Bitcoin and build a hospital and road and railways or whatever, but that is a central part of it. Like you can mine the Bitcoin to get other things to develop the country. And I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But Bhutan is a great example. There is a little bit of movement in Taiwan.
Yeah.
So we met with one of the legislators there, JC, and we're going to see if we can move it forward more. But yeah, that's there. Japan, hopefully something will happen soon. It's really hard to move. Like it's slow moving. You need to have agreement. And everyone is risk averse. That's the biggest thing that we learned from engaging with governments. They're all very risk averse. So if you look at it,
from the financial risk or publicity risk?
Everything,
just whatever.
So if you look at a company, like let's say GameStop again, right? It's career risk. Like if Ryan Cohen goes all in and it doesn't work and it crashes, then he'll end his career. And it's the same, but political career risk for politicians, right? If they advocate for Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes down, then they look bad. Even though we know Bitcoin will go back up, they're still concerned about these things. But it's got to get to the point where it's career risk not to get into Bitcoin. And I think a lot of them also are waiting for someone else to make a move, specifically the US. That's why I'm very bullish or grateful for movements in the US, because that makes our job a lot easier, because we will just say, like, look at the US, right? Like Korea will look at the US, Japan will look at the US, Taiwan will look at the US. And you saw that with the ETFs. And I think when the US does something seriously with accumulating for their Bitcoin reserve, everyone else will follow. So we're just kind of priming all the different actors in Asia to wait for that. And when it happens, we'll go back and say it's time to execute on what we talked about. Well, I see the concern that you have. I've said the same thing. Like it's a pendulum. If it swings too far one way, it'll swing harder the other way. So we'll see. But I think there are things that we can do, because the next election is not for a while. Like bipartisan groups should engage with Democrats and educate them more about Bitcoin. But yeah, I can't read it either way. We'll see. But I think Jeff is wrong that it's a nothing burger. It just depends on if, I don't know, Bo Hines or David Sachs can actually execute on the budget neutral acquisition. And I'm still hopeful that they can get that across because it's within the scope of the executive order. At the same time, I hope that the Bitcoin Act passes and they can actually formally do something. But I think the tone setting of the executive order is a very important piece of this because we can take that and go to other countries and say, hey, look at that. And while it's not active accumulation, it is at least something that we can present. And everyone looks to the US for guidance. If you look at the ETFs, it's the same thing. US started and then, well, Canada kind of had them, but it wasn't until the US made the move that Hong Kong ETFs and Australian ETFs came. And now we're seeing other regions look to open up to ETFs, if not launch their own. Like Korea, that's one thing they're looking at too. What do you think? So Bank of Japan, we're kind of advocating for them to do something with Bitcoin. But their attitude is more conservative and saying like, we can't do anything. Like, off the bat, nothing can be done. So the other one we had a call with, I don't want to disclose it, but they were keen to set up a meeting with us and talk about Bitcoin. And we spent like 45 minutes talking about the entire landscape. And they're just kind of like, yeah, that's cool, but we don't need it. So it's a mixed bag, but things change too. Like we met with the Central Bank of Suriname when we were in Suriname and we met the president there. And we had very good discussions for months. And we were proposing that they put 1% of their reserves into Bitcoin. And that was why we actually made the trip down there because the discussions progressed quite well. But then after we went there, the World Bank came a few weeks later and then they stopped replying to us. So there's a lot of different factors at play and if they're responsive or if they will even do anything. Yeah, like I think it's just like a new technology, even though it's not new technology. Like Sony they bought an exchange and I think they're trying to do some Web3 blockchain projects.
So they read a LinkedIn post in 2011 and they finally had the courage to raise it at a committee meeting at Sony. And so he's finally had it registered as an agenda item and he's going to get his chance to shine, right? Let's talk about blockchain, not Bitcoin.
Yeah, we're back in like 2015 or something. I don't know. Bitcoin is just like Bitcoin is an alien concept still. Like even though we had a lot of meetings and we would say, this is earlier when the ETFs first launched. When the ETFs launched, we would go and have meetings and we would say, guess what? The largest asset manager on the planet has launched a Bitcoin ETF and it's wildly successful. And they're like, okay, cool.
Not moved by that at all?
It's an alien concept. I think it's just time. It takes time for things to percolate. So, the first 6 months after ETF launch, even though it's successful, it's not enough. But now we have, a year plus of data. And you have the US moving on it and Trump talking about it. It's slowly getting into their systems and it's like simmering.
Bitcoin is moving from corporate treasuries to the desks of governments. And the idea of strategic reserves could be its next big leap. Samson Mow argues that one of the most compelling developments in nation-state Bitcoin adoption is the concept of strategic reserves. Reports suggest that Pakistan is exploring the creation of such a reserve and may even have tapped MicroStrategy's Michael Saylor as an advisor, though Mow cautions this remains unverified. In his view, the real breakthrough will come if the United States takes bold action, such as passing the Bitcoin Act and actively accumulating reserves. Until then, governments are likely to make incremental moves while preoccupied with larger geopolitical issues. Mow highlights in Japan, Metaplanet's adoption of Bitcoin has forced lawmakers to pay attention. Yet barriers persist, especially around taxation. Many countries still treat Bitcoin spending as a capital gains event, discouraging daily use. Creative workarounds exist, but widespread adoption requires regulatory clarity and better tools. For Mow, education and experience remain essential. He believes most people will only embrace Bitcoin's self-custody model after a moment of discomfort, such as Canada's bank account freezes during protests, that exposes the fragility of traditional systems. Meanwhile, Pakistan's stance on Bitcoin remains inconsistent. After banning trading in 2018, regulators have since softened, with courts questioning the legality of the ban and policymakers exploring blockchain's potential. Let's get back to the interview.
With the strategic reserve, the executive order for that, and new developments is probably the most interesting aspect of nation state adoption right now. But you do see follow-on with that. Like Pakistan announced that they're setting up their own strategic reserve. They appointed Saylor. I haven't fact-checked that. I've seen it, but I haven't verified it.
Yeah.
So take that with a grain of salt that he's their advisor now. But it's whether the US makes a big move, like a really tangible move, like passing the Bitcoin Act and actively accumulating Bitcoin, I think that is going to be the next big driver for nation state adoption. But we'll see like little bits and pieces happening here and there. And we do have our engagements and we're trying to move things along, but it's difficult. Like if you think of it as a normal person, where does Bitcoin stack up in your attention span in a given day? It's probably like, towards the bottom somewhere. It's the same for countries. Like they're always focused on some higher level drama, like Iran and Israel right now, probably top of mind, but it's difficult to kind of get them to prioritize something. But one silver lining, I think, of the Bitcoin treasury companies is that they're elevating that in the awareness. Like in Japan, we engaged with a number of politicians there. Metaplanet definitely has picked up on all of their radars. You cannot not pick up on Meta. Definitely hitting mainstream financial media, right? Because every day they're gapping up. It's like top volume of all stocks. You cannot ignore it. Just know that there's a ton of retail interest. Like at their shareholder meeting, they held it at the Grand Hyatt, and the lineup to take a photo like out the door, it's a full ballroom, like as big as a conference, as big as many Bitcoin conferences. So you have to at least admire what they've managed to achieve and the level of interest that they've managed to generate for a Bitcoin treasury company.
There are?
Yeah, there's a couple. I can't remember the names, but I see like so-and-so company bought 5 million or 3 million. They're popping up now. So it's becoming more of a thing. But you would have thought that Japan would be big into real Bitcoin, like self-custodial Bitcoin. But I think it is difficult still. Like we managed to understand it, but the average person just doesn't want to deal with the hassle of hanging on to Bitcoin. Right. It's just a burden that they don't want to deal with. I think there's a few barriers. Like one is tax treatment, right? For a lot of countries, if you're spending Bitcoin, technically it's a capital gains taxable event. And that is a barrier. So for Japan, I think that's the case too. So you're kind of disincentivized to dealing with spending Bitcoin. And actually, I met someone in Japan before, and they were saying they're using Oppo Wallet to maintain a separate Bitcoin stack because Bitcoin is Bitcoin and he can keep it in cold storage, but he'll get liquid Bitcoin, which is not Bitcoin, and he can just expend it and manage that and file his taxes accordingly for each transaction, but not have to interfere with his main stack. So that's an interesting workaround. But what you said earlier is right. Like we need to make more accessible tools and make them so beneficial that you want to have your own Bitcoin in your own wallet so that you can do all these things like, pay bills and convert and, use it in many beneficial ways in your life. So I think that is one step. But the other aspect of it, I think, is simply just time and learning. It just takes time that people need. They need to understand that they should hold their own assets. And it's a big gap going from your money's in your bank and it's safe, quote unquote, to I need to keep my own money and take responsibility for that completely on my own, 100%. And if it is lost or stolen, it's gone for good. And that chasm is a big chasm. And I don't know if there's a shortcut to get there. And I don't even know if we can fully bridge that just by making better Bitcoin wallets. It just might be a natural phenomenon that takes time. Like one thing I think helped for Canada was when the government declared martial law and started freezing bank accounts. And I think that educated a lot of Canadians into realizing, I probably need some insurance in the form of Bitcoin, which cannot be frozen, because that was unprecedented, but it showed how fragile the traditional system is. Like the government can just say, okay, you're a terrorist now because you donated to this convoy protesting lockdowns and mandated vaccine injections. And that is pretty shocking to most people that in a Western country, liberal democracy, that you can have this type of totalitarian, authoritarian acts happening. And it can happen anywhere. But outside of that, if that didn't happen, I would say a lot of people wouldn't understand that or cross that chasm. But because it happened, they did. So it's almost like you have to have that pain before you will move out of your comfort zone.
The race toward Bitcoin adoption is no longer a question of if, but when. Governments worldwide are slowly realizing that digital assets can serve as both a financial hedge and a strategic reserve, reshaping the balance of global finance. ETFs have already opened the floodgates for institutional participation, and political momentum is beginning to follow. Yet hesitation carries its own dangers. If the United States stalls while others move decisively, it risks being front-run in a space it helped legitimize. Early movers stand to transform Bitcoin from a volatile experiment into a pillar of financial sovereignty, while those who wait may discover that inaction is far riskier than embracing the future of money. Will the US lead the way in Bitcoin adoption, or will other nations seize the first-mover advantage? Crypto never sleeps. Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this with your circle, and hit subscribe with notifications to ride the next surge.